My brother-in-law deliberately gave my 6-year-old daughter cookies containing peanuts. He was fully aware of her severe allergy. He believed my wife and I were overly cautious parents, raising a fragile child. When she suffered an anaphylactic shock and required an emergency hospital visit, he calmly remarked, "See, she's fine. You two overreact about everything." I maintained my composure while our daughter recovered, but my subsequent actions led to consequences he never anticipated. My name is Ryan, and I'm 34 years old. My wife, Michelle, is 32, and our 6-year-old daughter, Lily, is the absolute joy of our lives. Until 3 weeks ago, I thought I understood what it meant to protect your child. Now I realize there's a profound difference between being protective and being forced to become illegal. Advocate because someone nearly killed your kid. Lily was diagnosed with a severe peanut allergy at 18 months old. This wasn't a minor sensitivity that caused a rash or an upset stomach. It was the kind where exposure could trigger anaphylactic shock and potentially be fatal within minutes. We learned this in the most terrifying way when she accidentally got hold of a peanut butter sandwich during a playdate. Within 5 minutes, she was struggling to breathe, covered in hives, and her lips were turning blue. The ambulance ride to the hospital that day felt like the longest 12 minutes of my life. Since then, Michelle and I have become what some might call hyper-vigilant about Lily's safety. We scrutinize every ingredient label multiple times, carry 2 EpiPens wherever we go, and have taught Lily from an early age never to accept food from anyone without our explicit permission. We inform teachers, babysitters, and all family members about her allergy before any interaction. We've made it unequivocally clear that this isn't a preference or a mild sensitivity. It's a life-threatening medical condition demanding absolute vigilance. Most people in our lives have been understanding and supportive. My parents immediately made their house peanut-free after Lily's diagnosis. Michelle's mother plans elaborate birthday parties with specially ordered allergy-safe treats. Our friends have learned to check ingredients before playdates and group events. Even our neighbors know to avoid peanut products when Lily is around. However, Michelle's brother Jake has always been different. Jake, 29, is single and holds very strong opinions about modern parenting despite having no children of his own. He works in construction, views himself as a practical no-nonsense type, and has consistently believed that Michelle and I are overreacting to Lily's allergy. He's never explicitly called us bad parents, but he's made countless remarks over the years about kids being too coddled. How previous generations ate whatever they pleased without issues. How constant worry about allergies and safety is creating weak children unprepared for the real world. Every family gathering with Jake involves a variation of the same discussion. He'll comment on how Lily needs to build up her tolerance, how we're teaching her to be afraid of everything, how other allergic kids he's heard about aren't nearly as restricted as Lily. Michelle has had dozens of conversations with him, explaining that severe allergies don't improve with exposure. It's often worsen, and that we're strictly following medical advice from specialists. Jake's usual retort is that doctors today are overly cautious, and parents who follow every recommendation without question are raising anxious, fearful children. He's repeatedly suggested we're using Lily's allergy as an excuse to control family gatherings and make everything revolve around our concerns. The frustrating aspect is that Jake isn't openly defiant about the allergy. He simply consistently challenges our authority and questions our judgment, making family events stressful. He'll bring peanut products to gatherings and feign surprise. When we ask him to put them away, he'll joke that Lily needs to try everything at least once. He'll recount stories of kids he knew growing up with similar restrictions who turned out fine after their parents stopped babying them. Michelle has tried to address this directly with Jake multiple times, explaining that his comments cause her anxiety and that his attitude towards Lily's allergy feels dismissive and unsupportive. Jake's response is always that he's just trying to help us see the bigger picture and that he cares too much about Lily to watch us raise her to be afraid of the world. 3 weeks ago, Michelle's family was celebrating her father's 65th birthday at her parents' house. A large gathering, about 20 people, including aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends. Michelle and I had completed our usual preparations, discussing the menu with her mother and bringing safe alternatives for Lily to ensure she could partake in the celebration without risk. The party progressed smoothly until the dessert portion of the evening. Michelle's mother had arranged a beautiful spread of birthday cake and various cookies, all meticulously checked to ensure they were peanut-free. Lily was excited to try several different treats, and we'd given her permission to choose whatever looked good from the designated safe options. I was in the kitchen helping clean up when I overheard Jake talking to Lily near the dessert table. I couldn't make out the exact words, but his tone was the familiar one he used when attempting to persuade her to be more adventurous or less cautious. I started walking toward them, but before I could reach them, I saw Jake hand Lily a cookie from a separate container that hadn't been part of the main dessert display. The container was one Jake had brought himself, something I hadn't noticed earlier because it was sitting slightly apart from the main food. Lily took the cookie and was about to bite into it when an instinct made me call out to her to wait. She paused, the cookie halfway to her mouth. I walked over and asked Jake what kind of cookie he'd given her. He casually said it was just a chocolate chip cookie, nothing special, and that Lily should try it because it was from his favorite bakery. Something about his tone and the way he was watching both me and Lily made me suspicious. To see the container the cookie came from, Jake seemed annoyed by the request but handed it over. The ingredient list clearly showed peanut flour as the third ingredient. I felt my blood pressure surge as I read the label. I took the cookie from Lily's hand and asked Jake if he'd read the ingredients before giving it to her. He retorted that he didn't need to read ingredients for a simple chocolate chip cookie, and that I was being ridiculous. I showed him the peanut flour listing on the label. Jake looked at it for a moment, then shrugged and said that peanut flour wasn't the same as whole peanuts and probably wouldn't cause any real problems. He added that this was exactly the kind of overprotective behavior that was making Lily afraid of everything. I asked Jake directly if he'd given Lily a cookie containing peanuts despite knowing about her allergy. Stated he'd given her a cookie and the amount of peanut flour in it was probably so small it wouldn't matter. He declared he was tired of watching us treat Lily like she was made of glass, and that maybe it was time for her to build up some tolerance. The conversation was unfolding in front of several family members, and I saw Michelle making her way over, having noticed the tension. I told Jake he'd almost given our daughter something that could have killed her. His dismissive response was that I was being dramatic, and that kids with real allergies wouldn't be affected by such a small amount of processed peanut flour. Michelle arrived just as Jake was explaining his warped reasoning to a growing audience of concerned relatives. When she realized what had happened, she went completely pale and had to sit down. Several family members began questioning Jake about his decision to give Lily food containing her known allergen. Jake's response to the group was that Michelle and I had been overprotective drama queens since Lily's diagnosis, and that we were raising a weak child who would never be able to function in the real world. He asserted that controlled exposure was probably the best thing for her, and that we should be thanking him for helping Lily build tolerance rather than treating him like he'd done something wrong. Michelle's father asked Jake if he understood that Lily's allergy was severe enough to require emergency medical treatment. Jake maintained that was exactly his point. We'd convinced ourselves and everyone else that Lily's condition was more serious than it actually was, and that our constant anxiety was the real problem. The party effectively ended at that point. Michelle was too distraught to stay, and several family members were clearly uncomfortable with Jake's attitude and explanation. We gathered Lily and our belongings and headed home, but not before Jake made one final comment about how our reaction was proving his point about us being dramatic. That night, Michelle and I had a long discussion about Jake's behavior and its implications for future family interactions. Michelle was devastated that her brother had intentionally endangered Lily and then defended his actions by attacking our parenting. I was furious but tried to remain calm for Michelle's sake. We decided that Jake would not be allowed unsupervised access to Lily going forward, and that we'd need a serious conversation with him about respecting our medical decisions and safety protocols. Michelle said she'd talk to her parents about the situation and ensure they understood our position. But before we could arrange that conversation, we discovered that Jake's dangerous experiment had more far-reaching consequences than we'd initially realized. 2 days after the party, I was checking the security camera footage from our front door because I thought I'd seen someone walking around our yard the night before. While reviewing the footage, I decided to check the timestamp from the night of the party to see exactly when we'd gotten home. What I found made my stomach drop. The footage clearly showed Jake's truck following us home and parking across the street from our house. The timestamp showed he'd arrived about 10 minutes after we did and had sat in his truck for nearly an hour, apparently watching our house. He'd never come to the door or made contact. He just sat there observing. I showed the footage to Michelle, and we both felt deeply unsettled. There was no reasonable explanation for Jake to follow us home and watch our house, especially after the confrontation at the party. Michelle called her mother to ask if Jake had said anything about planning to come over that night. But her mother said Jake had left the party shortly after we did, and hadn't mentioned anything about visiting us. When Michelle called Jake directly to ask about the truck incident, his explanation was that he'd been concerned about how upset we seemed and wanted to make sure we'd gotten home safely. He claimed he'd planned to come to the door but decided we probably needed space to cool down, insisted there was nothing strange about his behavior and that he was just being a caring uncle. Michelle asked him why he hadn't called or texted instead of sitting outside our house. Jake said he thought about it but didn't want to deal with more drama that night. He seemed annoyed that we'd even noticed his presence and made comments about us being paranoid about everything. The following weekend, Michelle's mother called to tell us that Jake had been asking questions about Lily's daily routine. He'd wanted to know what time she got home from school, whether she walked home alone, which route she took, and whether Michelle or I was usually home when she arrived. When Michelle's mother asked why he was interested in these details, Jake said he was thinking about surprising Lily with visits or treats and wanted to make sure he caught her at home. Michelle's mother found the questions odd enough to mention to us, especially given the recent tension over the allergy incident. She said Jake had seemed unusually focused on gathering specific information about Lily's schedule and had been persistent when she couldn't answer all his questions. Michelle and I agreed that Jake's behavior was becoming concerning beyond just the allergy issue. Combination of deliberately endangering Lily, following us home, and now seeking detailed information about our daughter's routine suggested a pattern of behavior that felt threatening rather than simply misguided. I decided to document everything systematically. I saved the security footage of Jake's truck outside our house, took screenshots of text messages where he made dismissive comments about Lily's allergy, and wrote down detailed accounts of his statements at the birthday party as reported by multiple witnesses. Michelle spoke with her parents about our concerns. They admitted they'd also noticed changes in Jake's attitude and behavior over the past few months. Her father said Jake had been making increasingly critical comments about our parenting, and had seemed almost obsessed with proving that we were wrong about Lily's medical needs. Michelle's mother revealed that Jake had asked her for our spare house key several weeks earlier, claiming he wanted to be able to help in case of emergencies. She declined to give it to him because it seemed like an odd request, but she hadn't mentioned it to us because she didn't want to create family drama. The more we learned about Jake's recent behavior, the more concerned we became about his intentions regarding Lily. It was starting to feel less like misguided family concern, and more like someone planning to prove his point about our supposed overprotectiveness through direct action. I contacted our pediatric allergist to get official documentation of Lily's condition and the potential severity of exposure. Dr. Martinez provided a detailed letter, explaining that Lily's allergy was severe enough to trigger anaphylaxis from minimal exposure, and that avoiding all peanut products was medically necessary, not parental overcaution. I also called our local police department to inquire about filing a report regarding Jake's behavior. Officer Stevens explained that while Jake hadn't technically committed a crime, the pattern of behavior was concerning enough to document. She suggested filing an incident report that would create an official record in case Jake's behavior escalated. The incident report included Jake's deliberate decision to give Lily food containing her known allergen, his subsequent justification of that action, his surveillance of our home, and his efforts to gather information about Lily's routine. Officer Stevens said that while each individual incident might seem minor, the combination suggested someone who was fixated on proving a point in ways that could endanger a child. A week later, Michelle received a text from Jake saying he'd bought Lily a special treat and wanted to bring it by after school. The text included specific timing that matched Lily's usual arrival home, confirming that he'd successfully gathered the schedule information he'd been seeking from Michelle's mother. Michelle texted back that any visits needed to be arranged in advance with both parents present. Need permission to visit his niece, especially not for something as simple as bringing her a treat. When Michelle explained that we weren't comfortable with unscheduled visits right now, Jake became hostile. He accused us of poisoning the family against him and said we were using Lily as a weapon to punish him for questioning our parenting choices. He asserted he had every right to maintain a relationship with his niece and that our attempts to control his access to her were unreasonable and probably illegal. The legal comment caught my attention. I forwarded Jake's text to Officer Stevens, who said the language suggested Jake might be researching grandparents' rights or similar legal concepts. She recommended consulting with a family law attorney to understand our options for protecting Lily. Attorney Sarah Kim explained that while Jake had no legal rights to access Lily, his pattern of behavior could potentially justify a restraining order if it continued to escalate. She said the deliberate allergen exposure, combined with surveillance and attempts to gather schedule information, created a credible case for concern about Lily's safety. The next day, Jake showed up at Lily's school during dismissal time. He'd apparently told the office staff that he was picking up his niece for a family appointment, and that Michelle had sent him because she was running late. The school's safety protocols prevented them from releasing Lily to him since he wasn't on the approved pickup list. But the attempt itself was alarming. When the school called to verify the pickup arrangement, Michelle was able to clarify that Jake was not authorized to collect Lily and that any future attempts should be reported immediately. The school's principal, Mrs. Rodriguez, said they'd add notes to Lily's file about the situation and would require written authorization for any changes to her pickup routine. That evening, Jake called Michelle, demanding to know why she'd blocked him from picking up Lily. He claimed he'd only been trying to help, that our reaction was proof of how paranoid and controlling we'd become. When Michelle explained that he wasn't authorized to make pickup changes without permission, Jake said he was family, and that should be authorization enough. Michelle told Jake directly that his behavior over the past several weeks had made us uncomfortable, that we needed him to respect our boundaries regarding Lily. Jake's response was that we were using Lily to manipulate the family and that he wouldn't be pushed around by parents who were too neurotic to let their child live normally. The conversation ended with Jake saying he'd do whatever was necessary to maintain his relationship with Lily, and that we couldn't keep him away from her indefinitely. The threat was subtle, but clear enough that Michelle ended the call and immediately contacted me at work. That night, I installed additional security cameras around our property and changed our door locks. I also spoke with our neighbors about the situation and asked them to call us if they noticed Jake's truck in the area when we weren't home. 2 days later, Jake tested his boundaries again, came to our house on Saturday morning while Michelle was at the grocery store and I was working in the garage with the door open. He walked up the driveway, carrying a bag of what he said were special treats for Lily. I told Jake that Lily wasn't available for visits and that he needed to leave. He said he'd driven all the way over just to bring her something special, and that it would only take a minute. When I maintained that he needed to leave, Jake became argumentative and said I was being unreasonable about a simple family visit. Jake then made a comment that chilled me to the bone. He said that Lily needed to learn that her allergy wasn't as serious as we pretended, and that he brought treats specifically designed to help her build tolerance. He claimed the treats contained very small amounts of peanut protein and that gradual exposure was the best way to help her overcome her sensitivity. I realized that Jake hadn't learned anything from the birthday party incident. He was actively planning to continue exposing Lily to allergens under the guise of helping her. I told him that any attempt to give Lily food containing peanuts would be considered assault and that he needed to leave immediately. Jake's response was that I couldn't prevent him from giving his niece gifts, and that my threats proved how out of control our anxiety had become. He added that other family members were starting to see our behavior for what it really was, and that we were isolating Lily from people who cared about her. I called Michelle and asked her to come home immediately, then told Jake to wait. In his truck, while I got my phone to call the police, Jake said I was being ridiculous, and that calling the police over a family disagreement was exactly the kind of overreaction that was damaging our relationships with everyone. When the police arrived, Officer Stevens took statements from both me and Jake. Jake maintained that he'd only been trying to visit his niece and bring her treats, and that my reaction was disproportionate to the ESO situation, he characterized the interaction as a misunderstanding between family members who disagreed about parenting approaches. Officer Stevens reviewed the previous incident report and asked Jake directly about his intentions regarding the treats he brought. When Jake explained his theory about gradual exposure therapy, Officer Stevens' demeanor changed significantly. She explained that deliberately exposing a child to known allergens without parental consent could constitute endangerment, and that Jake's plan could have resulted in serious medical consequences. Jake insisted that he'd researched exposure therapy and that small amounts of allergens were commonly used to build tolerance. Officer Stevens explained that such treatments required medical supervision and that unsupervised attempts could be fatal. She advised Jake that any future attempts to give Lily food without explicit parental approval would result in charges. Jake left that day angry and defensive, but I hoped the police intervention had made the consequences clear enough to prevent further incidents. Unfortunately, Jake's response was to escalate his campaign rather than retreat. Over the next week, Jake began contacting other family members to gather support for his position. He told Michelle's relatives that we were using Lily's allergy to control family relationships, and that our restrictions were harming Lily's social development. He shared articles about exposure therapy and argued that our approach was outdated and potentially harmful. Several family members called Michelle to ask about Jake's claims and to express concern about the family conflict. Most were supportive once they understood the full situation, but Jake's campaign was creating doubt and division that made every family interaction stressful. Jake also began appearing at places where he knew we'd be with Lily. He showed up at her soccer practice, at the grocery store we usually frequented, and at a restaurant where we'd taken her for a family dinner. Each time, he maintained that the encounters were coincidental, but the pattern was clearly intentional. The final incident occurred on a Tuesday afternoon when Jake approached Lily directly while she was playing at a neighborhood park. Michelle and I were sitting on a bench about 30 feet away, watching Lily play with friends from school. Jake emerged from behind a cluster of trees and walked straight to Lily. I could see him talking to her and gesturing towards something in his hands. Lily looked confused and kept glancing toward us, but Jake continued talking and seemed to be encouraging her to take whatever he was offering. When Lily started walking toward us instead of engaging with Jake, he followed her and called out that he had something special for her. Michelle and I both stood up and walked quickly toward them. Jake was holding a package of what appeared to be homemade cookies and telling Lily that he made them especially for her using a special recipe that would help her become stronger. Lily looked uncertain and kept backing toward us as Jake continued talking. When we reached them, I told Jake to step away from Lily. He said he was just trying to give his niece a gift, and that our intervention was unnecessary. I could see that the cookies in his package contained visible peanut pieces, making his intentions unmistakably dangerous. Michelle took Lily's hand and walked her away from Jake, while I confronted him about bringing peanut-containing food directly to our daughter. Jake's response was that the peanuts were clearly visible, so Lily could make her own choice about whether to eat them. He said it was time for her to start making decisions about her own safety, instead of hiding behind her overprotection. I told Jake that attempting to give a 6-year-old food that could kill her was not teaching independence. It was child endangerment. Jake said that children Lily's age were capable of understanding consequences, and that our constant intervention was preventing her from developing necessary life skills. The argument continued until other parents at the park began to notice and approach. When Jake realized he had an audience, he raised his voice and announced that Michelle and I were preventing him from having a normal relationship with his niece because we'd convinced ourselves she had a fake allergy. One or the other. Parents asked Jake if he was trying to give a child food she was allergic to, and Jake said that the allergy was probably psychological and that exposure was the best way to prove that. Several parents immediately sided with us and told Jake he needed to leave the park. Jake's response was to become louder and more defensive. He said that modern parents were creating weak children by accommodating every medical claim and that Lily would never become independent if we continued to control every aspect of her environment. At that point, another parent called the police while Michelle called an ambulance as a precaution in case Jake had succeeded in giving Lily anything dangerous. Jake became increasingly agitated as he realized the situation was escalating beyond his control. When Officer Stevens arrived, she immediately recognized Jake from our previous reports and asked him to explain his presence at the park. Jake said he had every right to visit public spaces and that our accusations were harassment. Officer Stevens asked to see the cookies Jake was carrying, and when she identified the visible peanut pieces, her expression became very serious. Officer Stevens placed Jake under arrest for attempted child endangerment. As she read him his rights, Jake shouted that he was being arrested for trying to help his niece overcome a fake allergy that her parents were using to control everyone around them. The arrest was witnessed by multiple parents and children at the park, creating a public spectacle that Jake clearly hadn't anticipated. As he was placed in the police car, Jake continued, insisting that Lily's allergy wasn't real and that his arrest proved how out of control the situation had become. Jake was released on bail the next day, but the charges were serious enough that he was required to stay away from Lily and our family pending trial. The restraining order we'd been considering was granted immediately based on the pattern of behavior documented in police reports. Jake's trial took place 6 weeks later. The prosecution presented evidence of his deliberate attempts to expose Lily to allergens. His surveillance of our home, his attempts to gather information about Lily's schedule, and his final attempt to give her cookies containing visible peanuts at the park. Jake's defense was that he'd been trying to help Lily overcome what he believed was a psychosomatic condition, and that his actions were motivated by concern for her well-being. His attorney argued that Jake's intentions were benevolent, even if his methods were misguided. Prosecution countered with expert testimony from Dr. Martinez about the severity of Lily's allergy and the potentially fatal consequences of peanut exposure. They also presented testimony from other parents at the park who had witnessed Jake's behavior and heard his statements about fake allergies. Jake was convicted of attempted child endangerment and sentenced to 6 months in jail, 2 years of probation, and mandatory anger management counseling. He was also ordered to have no contact with Lily until she turns 18. The conviction created a permanent record that Jake had attempted to harm a child, making it unlikely he'd ever be able to work around children or be trusted with unsupervised access to any minors in our extended family. Michelle's parents were devastated by Jake's conviction, but acknowledged that his behavior had become dangerous and unpredictable. They expressed regret for not taking our concerns more seriously earlier and committed to supporting our decisions about Lily's safety going forward. Jake's arrest and conviction became known throughout our community, and several other parents came forward with stories about his inappropriate comments regarding their children's medical conditions and safety precautions. It became clear that Jake's dangerous attitudes extended beyond just our family situation. Experience taught us that protecting our child sometimes requires treating family members as potential threats rather than trusted allies. Jake's conviction validated our instincts and gave us legal protection, but it also cost Michelle her relationship with her brother and created lasting division in her family. Lily, fortunately, was too young to fully understand the legal proceedings, but she knew that Uncle Jake had tried to give her dangerous food and that we'd taken steps to keep her safe. We've worked with a child psychologist to help her process the experience without developing broader anxieties about food or family relationships. Today, Lily is a confident, happy 7-year-old who understands her allergy and takes appropriate precautions without fear. She knows that most people want to keep her safe, and that the few who don't are not allowed in our lives. Jake completed his jail sentence, but has never acknowledged that his actions were wrong or dangerous. He continues to believe that Lily's allergy is exaggerated and that his conviction was the result of our manipulation of the legal system. The restraining order remains in effect, and Jake will have no contact with Lily until she's old enough to make her own decisions about their relationship. Then, she'll be equipped with enough knowledge and maturity to protect herself from anyone who doesn't respect her medical needs. Some people have suggested that we were too harsh in pursuing criminal charges against family but I have no regrets about protecting my daughter from someone who deliberately tried to harm her. Jake's conviction sends a clear message that endangering children has consequences, regardless of family relationships or claimed good intentions. Our job as parents is to keep Lily safe, healthy, and happy. Jake's beliefs about her medical condition were irrelevant to that responsibility, and his attempts to override our decisions forfeited any right to be part of her life. Today, Lily is surrounded by family and friends who respect her allergy, support her safety, and celebrate her strength.